Okay, good afternoon, morning, wherever it is where you are. Hope all you're doing well. So I wanted to talk about exam 2 a little bit. So, one of the things that I noticed was that the scores weren't exactly where I thought they would be. So for an open book, open note, unproctored exam, I expect them to be quite a bit higher. I want to be clear, I'm not complaining. I recognize that with that many people, if they're lower than I would expect, it's probably something with the quiz as opposed to with any individual. So I want to be clear, I'm not fussing or anything like that, but I wanted to get some feedback and see how I can make better exams moving forward. So I sent out a survey to do just that. Thank you to all 102 of you who responded. So I read all the feedback and I also looked at the chart. So I wanted to address some of the main points that were brought up. So I'll kind of show you the chart right here. It looks like the biggest two, when you put them together, were not enough time to answer all the questions, and the second bar right here is they ended up having enough time, but they still felt rushed throughout the exam. So right off the bat, I want to explain my thought process for why I gave 60 seconds per question. So the first reason was that the Mississippi State Online sent this out to instructors. Part of it suggested 60 seconds per question. That seemed reasonable to me at the time, based on the fact that if I give an exam in person, it's 50 questions, roughly, and probably 90% of the students are outside of the room by an hour. So that seemed pretty logical to give about 60 seconds a question. Now, I also did the exam myself. Of course, I'm a little bit biased. I don't expect anyone to do it that quickly. So I did it, and I was able to do it in, far less than an hour. And I think I allotted 75 minutes and 75 questions. I recognize that may not be true for everyone, but that's why I did it. So moving forward, I have decided to lengthen that a bit to do a minute 15 instead of just 1 minute, and that should address some of the issues with stuff not loading very quickly, and that should also make it to where you have more time to do it, and hopefully not so stressed as you answer each question. Having said that, as it says in the syllabus, you're still expected to know the material, and that's a very important thing. I say in there, you should have enough time to look up some questions, but not enough time to look up every question. So I don't want you to feel as though you can just approach the test without doing any preparation. That would not be the case. I still want you to know the material very well going into the exam. That said, you could probably have time to look up 10-20% of the questions and hopefully score a higher grade than you would otherwise. But I think the biggest thing is just go into the exam relaxed. Maybe easier to said than done, of course, but for the most part, when you go into something, you're relaxed and you have a drink beside you, maybe you have your notes ready. Just go into it prepared. I think that you'll have a lot better time with it. So I want you all to have a far better time with the next exam. I don't want anyone to feel rushed. I don't think I have the option to turn off the countdown clock until like 5 minutes remaining or something. I don't believe I have that ability. So my advice to you, if the countdown clock is bothering you, to maybe avoid looking at it, tape something over that part of the screen, whatever you have to do. But certainly I think the key there is to be prepared. And like I said, you will have an extra 15 seconds per question. But that's not a whole lot. I mean, that's 25% additional time, but that's not necessarily going to be a whole lot. So that's a great question about the final. If you do have 3 hours, it'll be more questions than if you have less than 3 hours. Because I'm going to do a minute 15 regardless of the amount of questions that I have. Or regardless of the amount of time, rather. So for example, if I could cut it down to 2 hours, I could do fewer questions than if it's 3 hours. I'll have to check into that. I don't know if the university sent out any guidance regarding that. That's one of the reasons why I put 75 questions instead of just cutting down the amount of time, was I wasn't sure what the guidelines were, because I know if the class is 75 minutes, you're expected to give a 75-minute exam. That's a very good question. I will check into that closer to the final. So yeah, I will be glancing back at my other screen there just to see if there's any comments. Feel free to drop any comments if you have them. But I think that having 1 minute 15 per question should alleviate a lot of the concerns with the time. So question content, I do want to go over this in quite a bit of detail. So first of all, any questions will be addressed within the lecture. And with the lecture, I'd strongly recommend that you take notes over anything that you don't know. So if I say something, I explain a topic that's listed on the PowerPoint, if you're not aware of that, I'd recommend that you jot down some notes regarding it to kind of jog your memory later. I'm not going to tell you how exactly to take notes. That's really up to you. That's just a suggestion. Find something that works for you to take notes on. You can also use the book as a resource. Like I said earlier in the, well, actually, I think it was during the review. I believe that the bookstore is offering free ebooks. So if you search your email for bookstore ebook, you should be able to find some information regarding that. Again, that's not anything I can really help you with regarding how to do it, because I've already got the physical book, so I don't really access it in that way. But that's certainly a great resource. That could be something that could be potentially free to access. It could allow you to quickly and easily search the textbook. You don't have to use the index to find a topic. You could just Control F and hopefully find it. I'm assuming they have that functionality. I could be mistaken. But it would certainly seem logical they would have that functionality. So that could be a great way to find some information about a topic you're not sure about. And then also, a couple people mentioned that it's not a vocabulary test. That's correct, it's not. So I want to show you this. This is Bloom's Taxonomy. Some of you may be familiar with this. But if you look at this, down at the bottom, there's knowledge. And knowledge is knowing what something is. And that's good to know. But I'd prefer to test you up here, where you're actually applying it and you're analyzing situations. So basically, what this suggests is that if I did a knowledge test, it'd be very easy to Control F and find the answer. Whereas if I do an analysis, I do my questions based on, can you analyze a situation and give a reasonable approach that a firm may take? That's a little different. So my tests have always been structured to where you're going to analyze a situation or you're going to apply the knowledge that you have. So, that's kind of the way that I prefer to do exams. And, that's certainly going to be more challenging to take, but I think that you'll have a far stronger grasp on the information. So the whole idea behind this taxonomy here is that as you move further and further up, your understanding of the material is going to grow exponentially. So for example, if I could tell you the definition of something, that doesn't necessarily inherently apply, or doesn't necessarily inherently suggest that I could apply it to a situation that I may be faced with. I want to make sure that you can apply the thing to the situation. So I said on, I think, day one, on syllabus day, I gave the example. My quizzes are straight knowledge exams. They're open book, open note as well. And I told you could Control F Quizlet and you could find the answers in 3 minutes probably. That's not how my tests are though. So I do want to make sure that everyone's able to apply the knowledge to analyze any problem that you're given. We're not going to focus so much on evaluation or synthesis. That will be more like grad school topics. But certainly for a 3,000 level class, it's important to be able to analyze situations and apply the knowledge that you have. So knowledge, you have to first have the knowledge, but the key that I'm looking for is to apply it. So if you have any questions about that, I'm certainly happy to take them. You can also attend the office hour, which will be after this lecture. And again, for people just joining in, I do want to clarify, I'm not trying to, what's the term I'm looking for? I'm not upset or anything. I'm simply trying to help you all perform better on exams moving forward. Because I want all of you to succeed, and I want all of you to understand the material and be able to apply it to future business scenarios. I don't actually expect you to memorize all the terms in the book. I certainly would prefer that you're able to apply some of the concepts that you've learned in this class to future business problems you're faced with. That's really my goal for this. Just kind of looking over this, that's where I want you all to be. So last exam, you'll think back, it was Some people said it was a little easier. Some people actually improved their score before I added a curve to this second one. I think that overall, I think that they slightly went down. I think the average changed by about 2 points on their all score. But keep in mind, on the first exam, you had 10 questions that were based on email etiquette. Email etiquette's probably a fairly easy topic. A lot of it's probably common sense. It's stuff you've been doing in your regular communication, hopefully, for the past 20 years. So that should come a lot more naturally than some of the other topics that are inside of Unit 2. So overall, I would expect to see, if they were both proctored, I would expect to see the scores decrease slightly. I was kind of surprised that they decreased on an unproctored exam where it's open book, open notes. So again, that's kind of the purpose. I wanted to make tests that better reflect your knowledge of the material. So having said that, it's important that you understand anything that I discuss in the lecture. So during the lecture, like I say, make sure that you're taking good notes. You can use the notes on your exam. You can do whatever you want to with the notes. They're your notes. And also, having said that, if we're talking about a topic and you don't understand the topic, let me know. Certainly during the lecture, I encourage that you put it in the chat. I'll address the chat, at a pause or a break or maybe a change of slide or something. Just kind of glance over at it, see if there's anything that I need to go over again. I'm happy to do that. Do bear in mind there is about a 15-second delay. So, whenever I have this slide up, there will be about a 15-second delay before I'm able to actually see any comments. So basically, when I'm speaking, you'll hear it 15 seconds later is what I'm trying to say. But then, maybe you missed something during the lecture, but you didn't realize you missed it. Well, then later on, maybe you forget, or maybe you missed the lecture, maybe you weren't able to watch it live for whatever reason, maybe internet problems, power outages, something like that. Certainly make sure that you see the topic and that you understand what the topic is. In general, the slides are an outline of the textbook. So most of the information can be found in the textbook. Like I said, you can access the textbook, I believe, through the bookstore. But if you're not able to find it, I do have an office hour that is immediately after the lecture. That's inside of Microsoft Teams. You'll be able to hop in, ask a question. I can go over things a different way if I need to. Maybe I could also explain things again if you missed it. Whatever I need to do to make sure that you understand the material. I want everyone to understand the material. So, like I say, and if all else fails, send me an email. I'll be sure to reply. So I kind of want to remind everyone that, we do have review as well. So I'll give you all the topics that are covered. You can ask any questions you want about any of the topics. If you want me to go over a specific topic, I'm happy to. Last review, I was quite literally begging for people to give me a topic to go over. So that's kind of how it works. I think that that's giving you the opportunity to understand all the material. That's what I want. I want you to understand the material to be able to apply it to business problems. So again, I want to emphasize during the exam, you can literally use anything you want. If you want to use your search engine, you can. If you want to pull up my YouTube lectures, you can. Having said that, you have a time limit. So you won't be able to watch all of the YouTube lectures in the middle of the exam. But you could probably find something if you had to in a pinch. And that's something I'd recommend that you do. So, if you're taking an online exam, it's unproctored, I'm telling you it's open book, open note, I'd certainly recommend that you take advantage of that and that you use that to your fullest potential. Because, one of the things that you're able to do is very quickly find information. Maybe you see something, maybe it's an application question, but you don't remember one of the terms that's an answer choice. Well, you can very quickly search for the definition of that term, and then you'd hopefully be able to get the correct answer. That's something I would expect people to take advantage of, and that's certainly something that you're able to. It's not cheating. I structured the exam in a way to where you can't just Control F the question. Hopefully some of your classes aren't doing them that way, but I'm sure they are. I'm sure there are some classes at the university that are using test banks, and you can easily find the information online. You can't do that in here because you won't find the questions, hopefully. So having said that, take advantage of what you can. I'm not making you use the lockdown browser. I'm not making it to where you can't go backwards in the exam once you answer a question. Those are other suggestions that I decided against doing from the distance program. And the reasons for those is because not being able to go backwards, I think you should have the opportunity to review the test up until your time expires. I think that's pretty fair for a test. And lockdown browser could cause a lot of issues, and I'm not even really trying to stop you from using external resources, so why would I have you do it? Okay, speaking of that, technological issues, I'll be honest, I was very disappointed in Canvas, how it handles images. For me to insert an image, it takes a very long time, unfortunately. And having said that, I have to publish the images inside of a separate little folder. So, and when I say publish, I mean you have to be able to access them. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why it is that way, but it is. So I'm going to live with that, and what I'm going to do, instead of having the images within the question, I'm instead going to provide them on a supplement, and I'm probably going to label them or make it clear which image to look at. Like I said, I kind of scrambled this past time. What happened was that I had them in a folder, and when I previewed the exam, I could see the images fine, but whenever students were taking the exam, they would instead see a lock because I hadn't published the folder of images. That's really not the best way to handle things, but that's a Canvas issue. That's not anything I can really do, so I'm just going to provide them on a supplement. If you want to use a different device, you can. If you want to have the supplement, kind of alt-tab over to it, you can do that too. Whatever is easiest for you to see the images. Like I said, I apologize. I understand that on a printed exam, you'd have it right there, and that would probably be a lot easier to reference. So maybe you want to print them off if you have a printer, access to a printer and paper. That's certainly an option as well. Like I say, I apologize. Images probably will be done on a supplement. That may be better for some people, worse for others. I guess the good news is that you'll know exactly what sort of images you'll be having before you open the exam. That's an advantage because I'll send them out via email. And then also, just a few people, not many, had some issues with loading times. So like I say, the main way I'm going to address this is by adding additional 15 seconds to each question. So previously you had about a minute per question, and now you will have a minute 15 per question. That should certainly alleviate some of the loading time issues because you'll have more time. But I also want to recommend that you use the fastest internet possible. So if your cell phone has faster network connectivity than your home connection, I'd recommend that you maybe set up a Wi-Fi hotspot with your phone, or straight up take the test on your phone if that works. Again, I've been told by distance education that doesn't work, but I don't believe that that's necessarily 100% accurate, to say the least. I'm pretty sure you could take a test on your phone, but maybe good to have it on a screen. So having said that, also recommend using the best computer possible. So sometimes loading web pages can be a little bit slower if you're on a slower computer, because there's really two things that are happening. Number one, you're pulling the web page from the internet, and number two, you're processing the web page to display. So if either of those two things are not up to par, then you may have some slight issues with that. So that's really all I can suggest that you do. Just make sure that you're using the best equipment you can. And beyond that, certainly I'd recommend that you learn the material very well. If you have any questions about the material, I'm happy to address them. Very happy. I want you all to understand, to be able to apply. And I think the most important thing is just to relax during the exam. So if you're taking the exam, make sure you do whatever you can to relax. If you have a pet, maybe have the pet there, maybe not, I don't know, it just depends on you. But whatever you can do to relax, I'd recommend you do that. Alright, so I'm going to switch over to the questions now. Looks like we've got an additional comment. So yeah, if you want to review the exam, send me an email and we can set up a Skype and I can do it that way. I don't want to have the entire exam open to where you're able to review it freely, but certainly I am happy to review it via Skype if you want to. So I'll just share my screen and go over any of the questions that you had regarding it. Apart from that, I don't see any other comments. Okay. So like I say, if you have any major issues with any of that, certainly let me know, and I'll do my best to address them. But for now, we're going to move on to the Chapter 12, Business Analytics. Okay, so Business Analytics is a very interesting chapter, at least to me. So this is a chapter where you can really take this and you can kind of form some of the previous things we discussed regarding some of the content, such as data management. We talked about in a good deal. Information security. This is where this all comes together, and this says how do we use those things for our advantage. We talked about organizations, how they have data and how they manage data. So for this chapter, we're going to start off by talking about management and what management is, what it does, why it does it, and how it does it. Those are some of the things we're going to cover. We're also going to cover the business analytic process, where we actually break the process down step by step and show how you as a professional would be able to approach this, or how you as a manager would be able to manage the process effectively. We're also going to cover 3 major types of analytics: descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. And then lastly, we're also going to talk about some presentation tools. That's where we'd actually discuss how you actually share your information, share your data, share your findings, share your suggestions. So those are going to be some of the ways that we're going to do that. So I would normally play a quick video here, however I'm not sure if the sound would even come across, and I don't want the stream to get taken down for copyright reasons, so it's a funny little 20-second Dilbert clip. If you'd like to watch it, certainly I'd recommend it. We're just going to talk about some of the overview. So the main 2 topics for this unit are business analytics and business intelligence. Now, those I am not going to ask you the difference between them because they're quite similar. The book even says they're practically indistinguishable. So the main difference between them is that business intelligence is kind of dealing with some of the technologies, and business analytics is dealing more with the processes. Having said that, the book says they'll use analytics throughout the thing. I don't think I have a single question that's going to deal with business intelligence. I think it's all going to be about analytics. So just know those 2 are very similar, but business analytics is kind of what we're going to focus on, even though business intelligence is arguably the same thing. You could make the argument that it's not. You could certainly talk about business intelligence being more processed. I mean, they both have processes included. I mean, you could make the argument. We're not going to worry about that, though. So just know that this chapter is going to be all about the processes to develop actionable decisions. That's a very important kind of thing to think about, because we think about what management is. At the core of what management is making decisions for an organization. So you have management within the organization. These are people who may be very high-level management, your executive level, C-level. They may also be very low-level managers. They may be line managers. They may be various types of management within any organization. So there's all these different levels. But at the core, what distinguishes a manager from a typical employee is the ability to make decisions. And decisions to benefit the organization, hopefully. Certainly making good decisions is very important. And within that, one of the biggest things that managers are going to be concerned with is productivity. So I think I said earlier in the semester that we're going to go ahead and violate some of the rules of physics. Basic rules of thermodynamics is that you cannot create more than you had in part. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. We're going to ignore that for now and say that we want our productivity to be positive. In other words, what we're putting in is going to be less than what we're getting out. So we have the definition of productivity is inputs divided by outputs. We want that to be a positive number greater than 1. In other words, if we're putting in 8 units of something and we're getting out 6 units of something, we lost stuff within the productivity. That's not good. If we're an organization, that means we lost money. If we put in $800,000 to an investment and receive $600,000 when it's all said and done, we lost $200,000. We want to avoid that. We want our productivity to be greater than 1. And if it's negative, it means we've lost a lot of money. But certainly that's what we were talking about. We're talking about productivity. This is a very important calculation, and it's applicable to many situations. So for example, if you spend 6 hours preparing something for your business and it saves your company 1,000 hours, that's a very productive use of 6 hours. We see that quite a bit in things like scripting. So maybe your organization has, let's just say, one person whose job is to create accounts for new users. That job could be greatly streamlined by automatically creating it whenever HR hires a person. And we could do that with basic scripting. So you could probably spend a good 4 to 6 hours and save your organization 2,000 hours a year. That's pretty substantial. That's just one example of productivity. We could also do things like streamline our manufacturing, do some basic business process reengineering, which I think we're going to cover in the supply chain chapter coming up. But the whole concept is you want to spend less time to get more time or reward or whatever the case is. You want your inputs to be smaller than your outputs. So that kind of feeds in. Within that, you want to make decisions as a manager. So these decisions could be anything from who do I hire, what do I do to increase revenue, what do I need to do to stock product. All those are decisions that a manager is going to be faced with. And there's many more as well. And the whole concept is you want to make the best decision possible. And one of the ways you could kind of approach that is to use IT support. So IT support could come in the form of a decision support system. We talked about that in Chapter 1 and possibly Chapter 2 as well. The whole concept is that we have a system whose sole purpose is to help managers make better decisions. So it's going to have various inputs regarding what's going to make a decision, and then it's going to provide you a suggestion. It's not going to make it for you, but it's going to provide you some suggestions, some guidance, and some supporting reasons for why you may take an action. So that can really help in making a timely decision because you're able to do that more effectively, you're able to do that more quickly, and it can also help you factor in many different things. So rather than simply looking at someone's income for determining if you're going to give them a loan or not, it can look at many additional factors that maybe you wouldn't be able to consider otherwise. For example, you could look at a credit score. You could pull that down very quickly as opposed to having to call someone to get it or do other things. You're able to consider many different factors, location, income, age, legal factors, of course. We don't want to do anything that would get us in any legal trouble, but you can certainly factor in many additional things. Then this could also do things like simulations with making decisions. You could simulate what will happen if we take an action. And you could do this with a multitude of actions. You don't have to be limited to just 2 or 3 potential outcomes. You could be limited to millions of outcomes and see what's the best outcome, see what's the most likely outcome. You can do all sorts of things. So different simulations, like a basic Monte Carlo analysis you could do a basic stress test. Stress testing is of course very popular within the finance industry to see what the impact would be of certain economic events. So for example, a mortgage crisis. What happens if 20% of people have their mortgage go upside down? That's something you could do a stress test and determine. In addition to that, IT and IS can also help the decision-making process by making it more effective and more efficient to communicate with people worldwide. So without IT, you may be limited to a phone call with one other person at a time, but with IT, you can have meetings with hundreds of people, virtually of course, and they can be located anywhere in the world, and that can be very beneficial. So IT plays a huge role in making better decisions. Let's talk a little bit more about what the manager does. So there's 3 primary roles for a manager. First is going to be the interpersonal role. And that's going to be where you're going to work with people, you're going to inspire people. I really like to think of this as an inspirational role. What you're trying to do is you're trying to be encouraging. You're trying to motivate people. Some examples of this role could include things like a figurehead, a leader, or a liaison. And what you're really doing in each of those roles is you're sharing a vision for the organization. You're being very kind of leading by example in a lot of cases. We also have the informational role. And exactly as that one sounds, you're going to be teaching and training people. So you're going to be providing them with information. It's very simple to think of in that way. So some examples of this could be things like disseminating information. Simply sending an email out to employees saying, hey, here's a new policy, here's how it will be enacted. We saw an example of that earlier with the office space memo for the TPS reports. That's an example of an informational role. We also have spokesperson. So speaking on behalf of the organization, that's certainly a very important thing to do. So those are 2 examples of that. And we also have decisional role as well. And this is where we go back to this chapter and we talk about making decisions. So we have a decision, we have possible outcomes, we determine which route we want our company to go. This is where we often allocate resources in this phase. Determine what course of action we're going to take. So we have examples of this in negotiation, certainly sitting down at the table with a third party and negotiating out pay. That's also a decision. How much are you going to pay your employees? Who are you going to hire? That's a decision as well. Handling any disturbances. If there's ever some sort of a strike or something like that, you want to be able to handle that. So you'd make a decision within the decisional role as to how you'd approach that. Okay. So I have a question here regarding if the input is smaller than output, wouldn't that be less than 1? Yep, I did misspeak about that. I apologize. So kind of regarding that, you just want to make sure that your inputs are going to be smaller than your outputs because kind of the whole concept is that you're able to have more than you're putting in. So that's kind of what the ratio is saying there. Great catch there, by the way. I appreciate it. So again, that's kind of the role of a manager. Now let's kind of talk more about decisions. So there's a lot of different types of decisions, and there's a lot of different organizational levels. So this may look a little bit familiar to a lot of you. This is a decision support framework. So we have 3 types of decisions. We have structured decisions, we have semi-structured decisions, and we have unstructured decisions. Now, as you may guess, these are going to differ by the amount of information you have regarding them. So a structured decision means you have quite a bit of information regarding it. You know that there's going to be an outcome. You basically know what the outcome will be. So these are types of decisions that could be automated, meaning that you could easily have a system that could easily do them. An example of a structured decision could be something like ordering. So if you get below a certain threshold, you know you want to order some equipment. Another structured decision could be assembling a fast food item. With a fast food item, you have a very specific recipe. You know that you have whatever the ingredients are, you put them together a certain way every time. That could easily be done by a machine. And that may be a cost-effective way. It may not be a cost-effective way. Probably for a local fast food place at this exact time, it would likely not be cost-effective. However, for a large factory, to make those types of food, it could be cost-effective. And you could also find that it's cost-effective to have specialized machinery that makes a specific item. So for example, if we're at McDonald's, maybe we find that it's cost-effective to have a machine that makes ice cream. So we don't have employees churning ice cream manually, we have a machine that does that for us, while at the same time, we don't have a machine that flips hamburgers. That could be an example of something where you would have a structured. I'm getting off track, so I should focus back. So an unstructured decision is something where you have a lot of information and ambiguity. Maybe there's some asymmetry happening, but the whole concept is that you don't know what the outcome will be. You can certainly have a multitude of outcomes. And a semi-structured decision is kind of in between those two, where we have some information, we don't have all the information. So it's really differing by the amount of information you have. And what this chart does a great job of doing is it goes ahead and gives you examples for each of these different types of decisions at the 3 major organizational levels. So we have operational, they call it managerial, you could also call it tactical, and you also have strategic level. So we think about a strategic unstructured decision. It could be things like, where are we going to place a new facility? That's a very high-level organization, and it's also going to be pretty unstructured. You're going to have quite a bit of leeway to determine where you would do that. That's going to differ from a strategic structured decision, like a investment portfolio, distribution systems, things like that. So it really kind of differs by organizational level, whichever level you're at, as well as what type of decision. So the main takeaway from this, though, is structured, semi-structured, and unstructured decisions. Like I say, feel free to leave any comments, questions if you have them. I'm happy to go back and address anything. But for now, we're going to go ahead and move on to the business analytic process. And this process is basically in place to help organizations form analytics within, and basically use analytics as well. So this is something that can be determined by the organization. They can have their needs, and they decide on what the process will look like specific to them. I'm going to focus on a generic business analytic process, but do keep in mind that organizations are going to have this done very specific to them, because one organization is going to be completely different from another organization, potentially even within the same industry. Right now we're seeing Intel and AMD, two processor companies that sell processors, competing pretty heavily with some of their latest lineup. And they're completely different. The way that they structure themselves is very different. Intel has focused probably arguably less so on R&D in the past 3 years than AMD has. Intel has been focusing on obtaining, what's the proper term for this? Forming relationships, let's say that, with various original equipment manufacturers like Apple, Dell, HP, whereas AMD's been more focused on making a product that can outperform Intel. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but it's important to keep in mind organizations have different goals. They have different ways to approach the goals. They're completely different from each other. So the business analytic process is going to be scalable by the organization needs. So they may have a case where they need to develop only one application to take care of all their analytic processes. Or they may have a case where they develop 500 different applications. There's no right answer. Certainly in general, it'd be more cost effective to have fewer applications to maintain. But that's not to say that you would never have a case where you'd use multiple applications. It really depends heavily on what the organization needs. Or if you have an organization that is involved in many different sectors of an economy, you'd probably have more applications in most cases. The reason for that is if you have an organization that's very focused to one economic sector, you're not going to need as many different functions. Let's think of an example here. Basically, think of like a holding firm that has a lot of different organizations associated with it. There's certainly some like Elon Musk. He has Tesla, he has Solar City, he has SpaceX, and probably a few other companies as well. Each of those do different things. He would probably need to have different applications to do them, and they're technically separate companies, but certainly they're also pretty related as well. So that's just one example. I'm sure you could think of a better example, but basically the whole concept is that as what your organization does expands into multiple economic sectors, it's likely that you need to have multiple applications to kind of address that. But the key here is that we want our applications to be enterprise-wide. That's going to avoid information asymmetry within the organization. It's also going to avoid information silos, where we want to not have a case where one functional unit has access to all the information, but other functional units don't have that same information. So we want to avoid that problem, and we do that with enterprise-wide applications, as we've talked about previously. And the whole concept behind this is that we want our business analytics to be able to help us better compete in the market. And in some cases, the market may have changed. Certainly 1 year ago, this class would have been taught inside of a lecture hall. 1 month ago, for that matter, this class would have been taught inside a lecture hall. We had organizational transformation, and we transformed, and now a lot of the classes, potentially all the classes, will be taught online. That's one example of organizational transformation, but the whole concept is that analytics can help you recognize when that may need to take place. If your market share begins to lag relative to a competitor, that may be able to provide evidence to further investigate and determine what actions need to take place. That's just one example. We're going to talk about more. But in general, we would have different stages of adopting analytics. So we would start off, if we're just a firm that doesn't use any analytics at all, we'd be completely analytically impaired. Our organization is not currently making use of any analytic technologies or reasoning to make any decisions. Now, as we move up, we reach localized analytics. That means that one functional unit within the organization is using analytics. And by the way, this is a very important concept right here, localized analytics. All these stages are very important. I'd certainly recommend you take notes and ask any questions about these. So the main difference between analytically impaired and localized analytics is that at least one functional unit within the organization is now using analytics. Whereas in analytically impaired, not a single functional unit within the organization is using them. And then, as we move one step higher, we reach analytical aspirations. This is when the organization's executives, and it's a very important point, is that their executives recognize that their organization needs to adopt more analytics, and it needs to be done organization-wide, enterprise-wide, whichever term you prefer there. So they don't yet have that capability, but they want to reach that capability, and they have top management support. The top management support is the main distinguishment here from localized analytics. That's what really changes. We still don't have analytics across the firm. As we reach analytical companies, that means that we have now implemented them across the firm, and we haven't necessarily fully encompassed them until we become an analytical competitor. Analytical competitors differ from analytical companies in that analytical competitors make their decisions based on their analytics. So, for example, let's say that we are Procter & Gamble, and let's say that we want to compete in the laundry detergent industry. If we're an analytical company, we have the ability to do that, but if we're an analytical competitor, we would actually take that information and base our decisions upon it, as opposed to simply having access to it. That's the main difference, is the actual application of it, system, or not system, but organization-wide. So certainly keep leaving any questions or comments. I'm happy to address them. If something doesn't make sense, or if I need to repeat something, or if you have any audio issues, stuff like that, happy to address them. Okay, so with business analytics, the main process that we start with is to consider our organizational strategy. Why does our organization exist? If we have an organization that strives to have low-cost leadership as their strategy, then we'd want to consider that. We'd want to make sure that our products are in fact low cost. And we first consider strategy. What is our organization trying to do? Then we would manage data. And this is hopefully something we would have been doing regardless. But when we talk about data management, we talked about reducing redundancy. We talked about making sure our data is not isolated. We talked about having our organization's data, having it well organized, having it be able to access for multiple systems. And of course, the accessing it from multiple systems is going to greatly be improved by using a technology like a structured query language database, as opposed to using proprietary databases that are tied to a specific application. It's going to greatly improve our ability to switch between systems and also use multiple systems simultaneously if the data itself is completely separated from an application. We don't want to store data inside of an application, basically. So we have proper data management. Then we actually analyze the data. So quite simply, we look at the data, see what is it telling us. We have 3 different types of analysis we're going to do. We're going to cover those in more detail. But we want to first describe the data. What is the data suggesting? That's basically what we would do, is just see what the data is. And then we'd want to predict what is the data going to lead to. And then we want to prescribe what should we do about it. Those are the 3 major phases there that we want to do. And then lastly, we want to act on it. So we have a prediction. We've talked about what we're doing now. We have a prediction of what will happen in the future. We have a suggestion. Act on it. That's basically what we're doing inside of data analytics. So start with a strategy, work our way down to analyzing the data, and then make a decision and act on it. So now we're going to shift gears quite a bit here and talk about how we actually would communicate the various things within the presentation. So if we have maybe a chart we want to communicate, how do we do that? Well, there's a lot of things you would consider in answering that question, how to properly communicate the information. First thing you want to do is consider, who are you going to be sharing the information with? Are you going to be sharing the information with executives with an organization, or are you going to be sharing it with people who aren't executives? What is their level of understanding of the things? What are they able to comprehend? Stuff like that. So you'd want to consider your audience, basically. Then you want to see, what is the data itself suggesting? So maybe you want to have the data properly represented. Well, hopefully you want to have the data properly represented. So to do that, there's a lot of different ways you could approach it. It's really going to depend greatly upon the data that you have. So if the data you have is not very doesn't shine a great light on your organization, what do you do about that? You could hide it. That's certainly one option. Is that the best option? Maybe or maybe not. You could also present the data and show how you can improve. That could be a better option. There's lots of different things. So that kind of feeds into biases. It's easy to say you should avoid bias, but how do you actually avoid bias? And should you even avoid bias? If you're presenting to people who will not like what you're telling them, should you present something that they will like? Or should you present something that is your vision of how they will reach something that you like? There's lots of different options for this. I'm not here to tell you what's ethically right or anything like that. It's kind of up to you to determine. So there's a lot of different ways we can actually kind of use this presentation. So if we're going to present information, we could do it in a report. We talked about business reports earlier in the semester, and the whole concept behind them is that we can easily communicate very qualitative information as well as quantitative information. We can easily write up a big report, put lots of information in there, put a graph or two in there, put some maybe output from some sort of test that we ran, and describe what it means. That's a great way to do it. We could also put some charts and stuff on a poster and do a poster presentation. Same with a slideshow presentation. Do a presentation in general, or some combination of each of these. These are all options for us. So if we want to do a slideshow, that's certainly a great way to put charts and stuff on there, but you don't want to necessarily put a ton of text on there. Whereas with a report, you do want to put a lot of text in there. It's a report. So you have lots of different options for how you would effectively kind of show the information. And again, if you have any questions about any of these, certainly let me know. But then we have data. We want to represent it. Probably one of the most common ways to do this is with some sort of graph, where we have an X and a Y axis, and we have a title for the graph, and we basically show what happens to the data over time. That's probably the best, most common way. I'm not saying it's the best way. We could also simply put the data inside of a chart or a table. Maybe we want to have summary statistics. That goes great inside of a table. Talk about the mean, median, mode, standard deviation of our data. We could easily do that for each variable. Min and max, that's the other good summary information. Chart could also be good if we want to plot out various points. We could do the visualization, where we actually visualize the data in some way, kind of beyond a simple graph. We could also use dashboards. So I'll show you an example of a visualization here. See if I can open this up. So basically a visualization is something that's more interactive than a standard graph. Let me get this over to this window right here. And you'll see this will actually kind of change kind of dynamically. So I'm not touching anything right now. It's changing the different, basically what people talk about with death, So it has media, it has what people search for, the actual causes of death, and it's going to variously kind of change for each of those different times. So it's an animation. This is a great visualization. I really like this. So it talks about the things that actually cause death, quite often heart disease. It's not something people worry about so much, and it's also not something that's frequently reported in the media. Whereas cancer, people do kind of worry about cancer. That's something that's searched about. People worry about it more. It's less in the headlines and things like homicide and other things relating to that. So that's one example of visualization. There are certainly very many, but that's just something I think is kind of cool to look at. So dashboards are also very interesting. Dashboards are going to be real-time information. That's the key with a dashboard, is that it's going to be updated in real time. So it's going to be pulling information from a variety of sources, or maybe a single source. But you could do a multitude of different things. So you could have some sort of widget or something within the dashboard where it allows people to drill down. And we talked earlier in the semester about drill down reports, but just kind of refresher. They're reports that allow you to increase the granularity of your search. So for example, let's say that you started off with having your yearly revenue. Well, if you click into it, maybe it gives you your quarterly revenue. You click in again, it gives you your monthly revenue. And you continually click in until you get your revenue down to the second. That may not be possible depending on the data. You may only be able to go to daily revenue or something like that. But that's basically the whole concept of a drill down report, is that you can move in and out of different levels very quickly and effectively. You could also have key performance indicators listed. Maybe you want to have your revenue for the day, maybe you want to have revenue for location. Whatever you think is important, that's a key performance indicator. So any sort of corporate financial performance measure that you find important could be a key performance indicator. It doesn't even have to be a CFP. It could also be something like how much inventory do you have? How much time off are people using? Stuff like that could be important. You'd also have status. You could have, I should say. And by status, I mean is something up or down. So you have a dashboard that tells you if various systems are accessible or inaccessible, and how long have they been inaccessible, how long have they been accessible. That could be very important to have. You could also have basic trend analysis, basically saying that if the previous trends we've experienced continue, what will happen to other things. For example, if we have revenue plotted, we maybe want to look at the trend for the past 5 days and see what if that continues for the next 5 days, what will happen. And we could easily plot that out. So those are some of the things we could do. Also, we talked about exception reports being where we would receive a report if some condition is met. I use the example of running below maybe 10% of our inventory for a certain item. We get an exception report. We could put that within a dashboard as well. So here's just a sample dashboard. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But it kind of breaks down some of the various things. You see on here you have some key performance indicators. These are probably drill down capable charts right here where you could drill down into them more specifically if you have the data. Again, you can't drill down without having the data. In most cases, if you had like a transaction, you could certainly have date and time associated with it. So it really just kind of depends as to what the organization deems important. But there's no real limitation as to what information you could put on a dashboard. Anything that you could fit on here, you could. So we've got some different visualizations, maybe some charts, lots of great things included on this dashboard. But in general, when you're sharing information, you want to make sure that you're having it very readable. You don't want to have too small a font. You don't want to have bad font. You want it to be very easy to comprehend what you're trying to say. You also want to make sure that the information is presented clearly. If it's not presented clearly, it can have some ambiguity, and you want to avoid that. Whatever the point is or the message is that you want to share, you want it to be very easy to kind of determine and kind of pick out that part. You also want to only include what's absolutely necessary. You could certainly overwhelm a graph by having a multitude of variables, but you want to avoid that. And then lastly, you want to also ensure that you're using appropriate colors. You want to certainly use colors that are distinguishable, and also consider using shapes and symbols as opposed to only using colors. That's a consideration. Particularly think of things that are printed in maybe black and white or grayscale. Any colors you have may not be distinguishable. Also consider color blindness. If you don't have the backup of having different symbols, you may not be able to have people easily understand kind of what you're trying to convey. So having appropriate colors is a great way to approach that. Okay, do keep leaving any comments, any questions, anything like that. I'm happy to take them. But here's some bad graphs. So these are graphs that are very confusing, and you can't easily tell what they're trying to convey. So with these 3D charts, it's very difficult to tell what a bar is. I can't tell, because these bars are covering up other bars, what the revenue, I'm assuming this is revenue, is. And for some of these years. So that's very difficult. Also the bananas in the background, while it's pretty humorous, that's not the best way to communicate information. Then this pie chart over here, you wouldn't want to have 100 things on a pie chart, because that means that on average, each thing is allocated 1% of the pie chart. Take 100 divided by 100, it's 1%. And that's very problematic because you can't easily tell which of these bars is which of these firms. There's much better ways to represent 100 most active traders, as opposed to doing it that way. So here's some good graphs. And these are good graphs because they're simple graphs. You can easily tell what this is. This is distribution of vehicles by origin and type. It's got the different types of vehicles. It's got the origin represented by the different colors and the frequency. That's a solid graph. It's not to say that it's the most accurate information. I don't know if this is accurate or not. I don't know what years this is from. Simply on here because it's a simple and easy to comprehend graph. Okay, here's another good graph here. Now again, I'm not talking about the dress code on sales. I'm not saying that's a logical thing. I'm just saying in general you can easily tell what they're trying to communicate. They're trying to suggest that using business casual increases revenue. That's what they're trying to suggest here, because they're saying down here people didn't use business casual, revenue is kind of iffy, but then as soon as they implemented the dress code, they're trying to communicate that the revenue rose for the organization. Is that logical? I would say probably not. It's only looking at a single fiscal year. It's very possible it's a seasonal enterprise. We don't know that. In general, though, you can easily tell what the different what they're trying to communicate here. Okay, so there's also some very specific tools we could use. For example, we could use Excel to communicate with. We could also use it to store data in, to build charts very easily if that's an option. PowerPoint could be great to use for developing presentations. You know, for taking your various topics, putting them on a slide, maybe throwing in some visualizations, and being ready to talk about them. That's all you have to do there. Word can be very powerful for building business reports. Maybe we want to build a report for our investors to have. Maybe we want to build a report for managers to have. Whatever the case is, we can probably do it fairly easily inside of Word. We could also use various business intelligence visualization tools. Some examples that are very common within industry: Microsoft Power BI can build dashboards and other visualizations very easily. You can share them across organizations, share them worldwide. Tableau as well. So both of those tools are used very heavily to communicate information. I'll tell you where you've probably seen them lately if you've been keeping up with the latest coronavirus cases. A lot of different states are using some combination of those to allow you to look into a specific county within the state and see how many cases there are kind of visually. That's one example of it. Data analysis tools as well. This is where we could actually take our data and analyze it, see what it says, what is it predicting, and what should we do about it. We can use various statistical packages to kind of take care of that and kind of aid in that process. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick water break here. If you have any questions, make sure that you leave them. Okay, so again, I do want to make sure that everyone has any questions, that they feel free to leave them. But for now, we're going to talk about descriptive analytics. So as we said, this is the analytics where we take a look at our data and we describe it. We're not really predicting anything at this point. We're not really making any determinations or certainly no suggestion. We're just saying, what is our data saying? And this is where we get the term of descriptive statistics from. So we have all these different measures of our data. We have our mean, what's the average of the data. We have the median, what's the midpoint of the data. We have mode, what's the most frequently occurring observation. Stuff like that. And we can apply these to various aspects of things like a decision support system. This is where we could do things like sensitivity analysis, where we see how sensitive is our data to a change. We're not looking and seeing what will happen. We're just kind of doing that. So, all this is only encompassed within descriptive analytics. We're simply describing the data that we have. So we could also do things like look at sentiment analysis. What are people saying about our products? What are people saying about our services? We do that with social media posts very easily. Looking for historical patterns within the data. Maybe we see that we're a highly seasonal industry, and we didn't know that. That'd be pretty rare, but there could certainly be some cases in which we'd be a seasonal industry, or at least an industry with some sort of patterns. It doesn't have to be a seasonal pattern. It could be a different type of pattern. We could also do predictive analytics. This is where we take a look and see what we think is going to happen in the future. So here we would use things like predictive trends and behaviors. So one example of this could be predicting fraud. So if we're a credit card company, this is very important to us. It's important to many industries as well. But the whole concept is that we want to kind of identify what is likely to be fraudulent behavior and form some countermeasures to do that. Or against that, rather. Not to commit fraud, to prevent fraud and to mitigate fraud is what I'm trying to say. And we can do this with basic tests like regression test. We could do things like some forecasting. And we're going to do examples of this in the next class. So Thursday, it'll be all about Excel and actually doing examples of these. So don't worry too much about seeing a real example. I'll certainly have those included next class. So kind of talking more about forecast though. we have the naive forecast. That's not to be confused with a lack of knowledge. It's simply where you take the previous observation and predict the future observation only based on the previous observation. So if the previous observation is that you sold 5 units, your naive forecast is 5 units. That's all it is. Simple moving average, you have some period of interest where you're going to take the average of those 3 without applying any weights. Contrast, of course, a weighted moving average where you apply a different weight depending on maybe how recent it is, or pretty much just how recent it is. So for example, maybe you had a 3 period simple moving average. You simply take the observation of the 3 most recent periods you have data for, and that's going to be your simple moving average. For example, if you had a company where you had sold 4 units in week 1, 5 units in week 2, and 6 units in week 3, your simple moving average is going to be 5 units, because you're taking 4, averaging it with 5, and averaging it with 6, which of course gives you 5. A weighted moving average is going to be a little bit more complicated. You're going to have a weight associated with each of the different periods that you're interested in. So if you did a basic 3-period weighted moving average, you'd be given 3 different weights, and you'd have weight 1, weight 2, and weight 3, and each of those weights have to add to 1. If they don't add to 1, you're multiplying by something that's not 1. You're either making it larger or smaller than it should be. So it's very important that each of your weights add to 1. And again, we'll see examples of these, so don't worry too much about them for now. Simple exponential smoothing. That's where you would actually apply an exponential kind of prediction to that and do some things. And like I said, we're going to see examples of it, so don't worry too much about this one for now. Seasonality forecasting. That's where you're going to look at the seasonality of a good or service and forecast based upon what period is interesting. So if you have a quarter, if you have data for a quarter, you would do quarter seasonality. If you had data for monthly, you'd do monthly. If you had weekly, you'd do weekly. Now, I'm not going to give you any weekly problems in here because that can be a little bit burdensome to calculate, but you will certainly see some examples using monthly and quarterly in the next chapter, or not in the next chapter, but the next class period. Trend forecasting. Again, that's kind of like seasonality, where you have something happening over time, only this is happening maybe across years, maybe across weeks. It's not going to be focused on a season. It's instead going to be focused on some period of time growth or decline. So that's going to be a trend. And then lastly, we have prescriptive analytics. This is where we actually have some suggestion and we're going to recommend it. So if we think about a driverless car, we've had identify. That's going to be the example from the descriptive analytics. We're identifying what is our surroundings. We predict inside predictive analytics. This is prescriptive analytics. We actually recommend an action. So we decide and then we execute. So we think about a supply chain. This is where we're going to actually take the action. So we've already determined what will happen with the forecast. We actually now have prescribed some course of action to take. You go to a doctor. They give you a prescription. Why do they give you a prescription? Because they're recommending you take it to get better. So just kind of wrap everything up today. We talked a lot about the managerial process. We talked about decision making. We talked about different types of decisions, structured, unstructured, semi-structured. We talked about business analytic process, specifically talking about descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. And we also covered presentation tools. So if you have any questions, I'm certainly happy to address them. I'm very happy to. I'll also hop in the Teams for about 15 minutes if I'm happy to stay longer if some people have some questions in there. Otherwise, I'll go eat. So certainly, I hope you all have a great day. Hope you all stay safe and healthy. And like I say, good luck.